March 15th, 1943, 2:47 a.m., Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. The metallic click of a pump-action shotgun echoed through the pre-dawn darkness, a sound that would haunt Japanese infantry nightmares for the remainder of the Pacific War. In the fetid jungle air, thick with the stench of rotting vegetation and cordite, Staff Sergeant Mike Kowalski of the 3rd Marine Division chambered another 12-gauge shell, the brass casing glinting momentarily in the filtered moonlight before disappearing into the weapon's receiver. The impossible claim had been circulating through Japanese command bunkers for weeks, whispered in hushed tones between officers who dared not speak it aloud in formal briefings. American forces were deploying shotguns, civilian hunting weapons, as primary combat arms in jungle warfare, turning what should have been honorable rifle-to-rifle combat into something resembling a slaughter at a duck pond. The reports seemed so absurd, so fundamentally contrary to military doctrine, that they bordered on Allied propaganda designed to demoralize Imperial forces through sheer incredulity. Colonel Takeshi Yamamoto, commanding the 38th Infantry Regiment, had laughed when the intelligence reached his headquarters tent, his voice carrying the bitter edge of a career officer who had witnessed too many American fabrications. "Shotguns?" he had said to his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Sato, while examining captured Marine equipment inventories. "What's next? Bamboo spears and slingshots?" The colonel's dismissive chuckle rippled through the command staff, men who had trained their entire adult lives in the precision art of rifle marksmanship, the careful calculation of range and windage that separated professional soldiers from armed peasants. But Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka of the 229th Infantry Battalion had seen something different during his reconnaissance patrol 3 nights earlier, something that didn't match the colonel's comfortable assumptions about American military incompetence. In his hastily scrawled field report, filed with Division Intelligence on March 12th, Tanaka had described rapid-firing weapons producing multiple projectiles per discharge, devastating effectiveness at ranges under 50 meters, complete suppression of advancing infantry elements. The report had been filed alongside 17 similar accounts from forward observers, patrol leaders, and the few survivors of recent engagements who had lived long enough to provide testimony. Marine Corps Ordnance Report 43-127, dated February 28, 1943, contained specifications that would have seemed like science fiction to Japanese planners accustomed to the elegant simplicity of the Arisaka rifle. The standard Winchester Model 12 pump-action shotgun, Parteo, according to technical documentation captured from a Marine supply depot, fired 9 .33 caliber pellets per shell, each projectile capable of inflicting lethal wounds at ranges up to 40 meters, with a trained operator capable of delivering 6 shells in rapid succession before requiring reload procedures. The mathematics were becoming undeniable, though they violated every principle of infantry doctrine taught in Japanese military academies, where a single rifle bullet might wound one enemy soldier, requiring precise aim and favorable conditions. A single shotgun shell could incapacitate multiple targets simultaneously, transforming jungle combat from a chess match of positioning and marksmanship into something resembling industrial harvesting. The weapon's effectiveness increased exponentially in the dense vegetation of Pacific Islands, where traditional rifle tactics became exercises in futility against an enemy who could deliver devastating firepower at point-blank range without requiring the accuracy that had taken Japanese soldiers years to master. Technical analysis revealed the shotgun's true revolutionary potential in close-quarters jungle warfare, where visibility rarely exceeded 20 meters and engagement ranges often dropped to less than 10. Each 12-gauge shell contained approximately 437 grains of lead shot, compared to the 139-grain bullet of a standard 30-06 rifle cartridge, delivering nearly 3 times the projectile mass per discharge while requiring minimal training for effective employment. The weapon's spread pattern, considered a liability in conventional warfare, became a decisive advantage in jungle fighting, where multiple enemies might advance simultaneously through narrow corridors of vegetation, presenting targets that conventional rifles could engage only sequentially. It was the mathematics of overwhelming firepower applied to confined spaces, industrial production meeting tactical innovation in ways that Japanese military doctrine had never anticipated or prepared to counter. The central set piece began on March 16, 1943, at 0530 hours, when elements of the Japanese 38th Infantry Regiment launched what they believed would be a decisive counterattack against Marine positions along the Torokina River perimeter. Captain Hideki Matsumoto led 3 companies, approximately 340 men, through the jungle approaches. Their movements practiced and disciplined. Bayonets fixed for the final assault that Japanese doctrine demanded in close combat situations. The distance between opposing forces contracted rapidly, 200 meters, 100, 75, the jungle closing around both armies like the walls of a killing box neither side had designed, but both would soon understand with terrible clarity. At 50 meters, the Americans opened fire, and the world transformed into something Matsumoto had never experienced in 2 years of combat across China and the Philippines. The sound wasn't the sharp crack of rifle fire, but a deeper, throaty roar, like industrial machinery tearing through sheet metal, multiplied across the entire defensive line as 47 Marines armed with Winchester and Ithaca shotguns discharged their weapons nearly simultaneously. The jungle erupted in a maelstrom of lead shot, moving at approximately 1,200 feet per second. Each pellet seeking flesh with the indiscriminate efficiency of a mechanical reaper working a wheat field. The first rank of Japanese infantry, approximately 60 men advancing in loose formation, went down as though swept by an invisible scythe, bodies jerking and spinning as multiple projectiles found targets. The mathematical probability of evasion reduced to 0 when 9 pellets occupied the space where a single bullet might have traveled. Matsumoto himself took 3 pellets in his left shoulder and 2 more in his chest, the impact throwing him backward into a tangle of vines where he would remain conscious long enough to witness the complete disintegration of his unit's cohesion. The second rank, advancing behind the first, collided with the dead and wounded, creating a momentary cluster of targets that received the Marines' second volley with even more devastating effect. Within 90 seconds, the counterattack had ceased to exist as an organized military operation, becoming instead a desperate scramble for survival as individual soldiers attempted to retreat through jungle that offered no cover against weapons designed to penetrate brush and vegetation. Private First Class Jimmy Robertson, a former duck hunter from Louisiana, would later report to his company commander that he had expended 18 shells in less than 2 minutes, never bothering to aim in the traditional sense, but simply pointing his weapon toward concentrations of movement and firing, trusting the shotgun's spread pattern to find targets that conventional marksmanship might have missed. Robertson's kill count for that engagement would be estimated at 11 confirmed, 17 probable, though the chaos of jungle combat made precise accounting impossible. The surviving Japanese infantry withdrew in disorder, leaving behind 73 dead and an estimated 100 wounded, many of whom would die before reaching aid stations. Marine casualties, 3 wounded, none fatal. A casualty ratio that seemed to violate the fundamental principles of warfare that assumed comparable losses when similarly equipped forces engaged at close range. But the forces were not similarly equipped, and that disparity was about to scale beyond anything Japanese commanders could comprehend through tactical analysis alone. The systemic expansion of American shotgun deployment revealed numbers that transformed isolated battlefield success into industrial inevitability. Winchester Repeating Arms Company, operating its New Haven, Connecticut facility at maximum capacity, produced 79 348 Model 12 shotguns in 1943 alone, averaging 217 weapons per day, each one destined for Pacific Theater deployment after minimal modification for military service. Ithaca Gun Company contributed an additional 38,774 Model 37 shotguns during the same period, while Remington Arms manufactured 21,903 Model 31 variants specifically for Marine Corps and Army procurement contracts. The ammunition production figures dwarfed even these impressive numbers, revealing the true scale of American industrial commitment to this unconventional weapon system. Federal Cartridge Company alone produced 47 million 12-gauge shells in 1943, approximately 128,767 shells per day, enough to supply every Marine division in the Pacific with 2,300 rounds per deployed shotgun monthly. Winchester Western added another 33 million shells to the supply chain, while Remington contributed 28 million more, creating a total annual production exceeding 108 million rounds of shotgun ammunition, more shells than the entire Japanese military industry produced rifle cartridges in the same period. The logistical infrastructure supporting this ammunition avalanche operated with mechanical precision that Japanese intelligence analysts found nearly impossible to believe even when confronted with captured documentation. Marine Corps Supply Depot, Noumea, New Caledonia, processed an average of 847,000 12-gauge shells monthly through its ammunition handling facilities during peak operations in mid-1943, with each shell packed in waxed cardboard boxes of 25, crated in lots of 500, and shipped forward to division supply points on a rotating 7-day cycle that ensured no Marine unit ever faced ammunition shortages. The supply chain extended backward across 7,000 miles of Pacific Ocean to manufacturing facilities in Connecticut, New York, and Minnesota, maintained by a logistics network that moved more shotgun ammunition in a single month than the Japanese Navy transported rice to its starving garrisons in the same period. Staff Sergeant Kowalski, the man whose shotgun click had opened this narrative, had personally expended 143 shells during the first 2 weeks of March 1943, a rate of expenditure that would have bankrupted any pre-war military budget but barely registered as a rounding error in the vast accounting ledgers of American war production. His weapon, a Winchester Model 12 bearing serial number 963847, had fired approximately 2,800 rounds since its deployment in November 1942 without requiring major maintenance beyond routine cleaning. The robust American manufacturing tolerances allowing for a sustained combat use that Japanese planners had assumed impossible for any weapon system operating in tropical conditions. The enemy realization moment came not in a single dramatic revelation, but through accumulated horror. The slow understanding that American material superiority extended even to weapons that civilized armies had abandoned as barbaric holdovers from frontier warfare. Lieutenant Sato, the aide-de-camp who had shared Colonel Yamamoto's initial laughter about shotgun deployment, found himself examining captured Marine equipment after a disastrous engagement on March 22nd, handling a Winchester Model 12 with the tentative respect one might accord an unexploded bomb. The weapon felt impossibly solid in his hands, its machined steel receiver and walnut stock representing manufacturing quality that exceeded anything in Japanese small arms inventory. Each component precisely fitted and finished to tolerances that suggested the Americans built even their improvised weapons with the same industrial perfectionism they applied to battleship construction. In Sato's field notebook, recovered after his death 3 weeks later, appeared an entry dated March 23, 1943, written in precise military hand that gradually deteriorated into barely legible scrawl as the full implications became clear. Examined captured American shotgun today. Weight approximately 8 pounds. Magazine capacity, 6 shells plus 1 in chamber. Asked prisoner through interpreter about cost. He laughed. Said maybe $30 before the war. Now issued free like everything else Americans give their soldiers. $30. Less than the cost of one good sword. They arm entire divisions with weapons they consider disposable sporting goods. We cannot win this war through courage alone. The technical specifications that Sato had documented revealed design choices that prioritized mass production over individual craftsmanship. The American industrial philosophy made manifest in blued steel and hardwood. The Model 12's takedown mechanism allowed complete disassembly without tools, facilitating field maintenance by soldiers with minimal training, while its crossbolt safety could be operated by frozen or injured fingers. Design considerations that Japanese weapons engineers had never prioritized in their pursuit of mechanical elegance. The shotgun's barrel, manufactured through a cold hammer forging process that Winchester had perfected for civilian markets, could withstand sustained firing schedules that would have destroyed traditionally crafted barrels. The metal's grain structure aligned for maximum strength through industrial processes that had no equivalent in Japanese armories. But the most devastating realization came not from examining the weapon itself, but from understanding the ammunition supply system that made its tactical employment possible. Each Marine infantry company in the Pacific Theater maintained a basic load of 4,000 shotgun shells distributed among its weapons platoons. Enough ammunition to sustain high-intensity combat operations for approximately 2 weeks without resupply, a logistical buffer that Japanese units could achieve only for rifle ammunition and only then under ideal circumstances. The Marines rotated stocks monthly, shipping unexpended ammunition to rear areas for inspection and replacement, treating 12-gauge shells with the same casual abundance they accorded sea rations and cigarettes, consumable supplies ordered by the ton rather than rationed by the round. The strategic implications rippled outward from individual engagements to theater-wide operational planning, forcing Japanese commanders to acknowledge that they faced not merely a tactical problem but a fundamental mismatch in industrial philosophies. Marine Corps Tactical Directive 43-8, issued April 2, 1943, formalized shotgun employment doctrine in ways that revealed how thoroughly American forces had integrated this weapon into their operational framework. The directive specified shotgun allocation rates of 1 weapon per 12-man rifle squad for general infantry, increasing to 1 per 8 men for units designated for jungle assault operations, with ammunition basic loads calculated at 250 rounds per weapon, renewable on a 72-hour resupply cycle that assumed unlimited availability from theater logistics infrastructure. The mathematics of close-quarters firepower advantage became even more staggering when Japanese operations officers attempted to calculate equivalent rifle firepower required to match shotgun effectiveness in typical jungle engagement scenarios. A single Marine armed with a Winchester Model 12 could, in theory, engage and neutralize up to 9 targets with a single trigger pull at ranges under 30 meters. Assuming optimal spread pattern and target disposition, achieving similar suppressive effect with Arisaka rifles would require at least 5 riflemen firing simultaneously with perfect accuracy, a tactical impossibility in the confusion and limited visibility of jungle combat where conventional marksmanship skills became largely irrelevant. Colonel Yamamoto, who had laughed at the initial intelligence reports about American shotgun deployment, now found himself drafting tactical guidance that read like the desperate innovations of a losing army. His directive, circulated to regimental commanders on April 7th, 1943, explicitly warned against close-range jungle engagements with American forces, recommending instead that Japanese infantry maintain minimum engagement distances of 100 meters where rifle marksmanship might offset shotgun advantages. The guidance tacitly acknowledged what battlefield results had already proven. In the dense jungle terrain that dominated Pacific Island warfare, maintaining 100-meter engagement distances was tactically impossible, meaning Japanese infantry would inevitably face American shotguns under conditions that maximized the weapon's devastating effectiveness, while neutralizing Japanese advantages in individual marksmanship and unit discipline. Private Yoshio Nakamura, captured during the reduction of Japanese positions on Rendova Island in June 1943, provided testimony to Marine intelligence officers that revealed the psychological impact of facing shotgun-armed opponents in close combat. His account, transcribed by Sergeant Thomas Liu serving as interpreter, appeared in Intelligence Summary 43-156, dated June 24, 1943. We called them the rain guns because the sound was like heavy rain hitting metal roofs. You could hear them over rifle fire easily. My platoon attacked American positions 3 times. First attack, we lost maybe 20 men in 30 seconds. Second attack, maybe 25. After third attack, only 11 men left from original 47. Lieutenant ordered us to fix bayonets and charge because staying in jungle was death anyway. Better to die moving forward than shot like animals in brush. Americans just kept firing. Kept firing. Shotguns never seemed to run out of ammunition. Nakamura's testimony aligned with other prisoner accounts and captured documents that collectively painted a picture of Japanese infantry morale deteriorating under the cumulative psychological pressure of facing weapons that seemed to violate fundamental assumptions about how modern warfare should operate. Japanese soldiers had trained extensively for the decisive bayonet charge, the climactic moment when individual courage and martial spirit would overcome material disadvantages. But shotguns transformed these charges from honorable last stands into mechanical slaughter, the weapon's point-blank effectiveness rendering Japanese close combat doctrine not merely obsolete but suicidally futile. The production infrastructure supporting American shotgun deployment continued expanding, even as tactical employment became routine, revealing an industrial momentum that operated independently of battlefield necessity. By July 1943, combined American shotgun production exceeded 15,000 weapons monthly, a manufacturing rate that outpaced actual Marine Corps and Army requirements by approximately 40%, creating surplus inventory that would eventually see these weapons deployed to auxiliary forces, military police units, and rear area security details. The excess production reflected not wasteful planning, but the fundamental American industrial approach: manufacture in such overwhelming quantities that supply could never become a constraining factor on tactical operations. Even if half the production disappeared into logistics infrastructure inefficiencies or equipment losses, the ammunition production figures told an even more dramatic story of industrial excess deployed toward a single tactical purpose. Western Cartridge Company, operating 3 shifts daily at its East Alton, Illinois facility, consumed 127 tons of lead shot monthly and 12-gauge shell production during peak 1943 operations, transforming raw material into finished ammunition at a rate of 6,847 shells per hour, 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. The machinery operating with mechanical consistency that treated warfare as simply another manufacturing problem requiring systematic solution through applied industrial capacity. The lead itself arrived from 17 different smelting facilities scattered across the American Midwest, each one feeding the ammunition supply chain with materials sufficient to produce more shotgun shells in a single day than Japanese armories manufactured rifle cartridges in an entire week. The geometric patterns of shotgun effectiveness in jungle warfare created tactical situations that defied traditional military analysis, transforming combat from calculated exchanges of fire into what resembled industrial accidents involving human bodies and high-velocity lead. Marine after-action reports from Guadalcanal, New Georgia, and Bougainville documented engagement ranges averaging 23 meters, distances at which a single 12-gauge shell's spread pattern covered approximately 14 square feet, meaning any enemy soldier within that cone of fire faced near-certain incapacitation regardless of cover or concealment. Japanese infantry advancing through jungle corridors naturally formed into linear formations dictated by vegetation density, creating target profiles perfectly suited for shotgun engagement, with multiple soldiers often occupying the same 14-square-foot impact zone, allowing a single well-placed shell to incapacitate 3 or 4 men simultaneously. Gunnery Sergeant William Hawkins, recipient of the Navy Cross for actions on Tarawa in November 1943, would later describe his shotgun employment technique to a Marine Corps training film crew with clinical precision that stripped away any romantic notions about combat. "You don't aim a shotgun in jungle fighting, not like you aim a rifle," Hawkins explained, his hands unconsciously performing the loading motions even without a weapon present. "You point at concentrations, at movement, at sounds. Shell goes in the chamber. You pump, you fire, you pump again, you fire again." I went through 14 shells in maybe 20 seconds during one engagement. Found 6 dead Japanese soldiers afterward in an area about the size of my mother's parlor back in Tennessee. Not one of them got closer than 15 feet to our position. That's what the shotgun does. It makes close combat not close anymore. The industrial support system enabling this tactical dominance extended into areas that Japanese logistics officers would have considered impossibly wasteful extravagance. Each shotgun shell, from raw materials to finished ammunition, required approximately 47 separate manufacturing operations across multiple facilities, consuming electrical power, machine tool capacity, skilled labor, and transportation infrastructure in quantities that seemed disproportionate to the end product's apparent simplicity. Yet American industry executed this complex manufacturing choreography so efficiently that finished 12-gauge shells cost the government approximately 4 cents per round under wartime procurement contracts, a price point that made ammunition expenditure calculations essentially meaningless in tactical planning, permitting Marines to fire at suspected enemy positions, at suspicious movements in vegetation, at sounds that might indicate hostile activity, treating ammunition as an essentially free resource to be expended liberally rather than hoarded carefully. Captain Robert Blake, commanding Company B, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, maintained a meticulous ammunition expenditure log throughout his unit's deployment to the Solomon Islands between February and August 1943, documentation that survived the war and provided historians with granular insights into shotgun employment patterns. Blake's company, consisting of 183 men at full strength, expended 14,1847 12-gauge shells during 6 months of combat operations, an average of 2,474 shells monthly or approximately 82 shells daily, suggesting that shotgun-armed Marines fired their weapons at roughly 10 times the rate of conventional riflemen. The ready availability of ammunition, encouraging aggressive suppressive fire that kept Japanese forces perpetually off balance and unable to mount coordinated assaults. The testimony of Marine riflemen who fought alongside shotgun-armed comrades revealed the weapon's psychological impact extended beyond enemy forces to friendly troops who found themselves reevaluating their understanding of modern infantry combat. Private First Class Daniel McCarthy, interviewed for the Marine Corps Oral History Project in 1944, recalled his first exposure to shotgun firepower during night defensive operations on New Georgia. "I'd been in combat maybe 3 weeks, thought I understood how fighting worked. Then the Japanese hit our perimeter around midnight, maybe 50 or 60 of them, and the guys with shotguns opened up. It sounded like the world ending. I couldn't see much in the darkness. Just muzzle flashes and the shapes of bodies falling, Whole attack lasted maybe 2 minutes. Morning came and we counted 31 dead Japanese soldiers in front of a position defended by 8 Marines, 3 of them with shotguns. Changed how I thought about what we were doing. Wasn't warfare like in the movies. Was more like pest control, if I'm being honest. Bothered me then. Still bothers me now. The Japanese military establishment's gradual acceptance of their predicament appeared in increasingly desperate tactical innovations that acknowledged shotgun dominance without explicitly admitting the underlying industrial disparity. Imperial Japanese Army Field Manual Supplement 17C, distributed to division commanders in August 1943, contained sections on countering American automatic scatter weapons that recommended night attacks, extended engagement ranges and dispersed formations, tactical adjustments that effectively conceded Japanese inability to engage American forces under conditions where shotguns could be employed effectively. The manual's prose maintained the formal dignity expected of official military doctrine, but its operational recommendations amounted to advising Japanese infantry to avoid close combat entirely. A tactical philosophy fundamentally incompatible with the confined geography of Pacific Island warfare, where 100-meter engagement distances existed only in the fevered imaginations of staff officers who had never fought through jungle vegetation. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding Japanese forces on Guadalcanal, witnessed the shotgun's tactical impact during the final months of that campaign's desperate defense. Observations that appeared in his personal diary recovered by American forces after the war. The entry dated January 17, 1943, written in cramped characters, suggesting composition under difficult conditions, read, "American patrols now operating with weapons that fire multiple projectiles simultaneously. Our men call them the demon guns. Whose casualties from these weapons show distinctive patterns, multiple small wounds clustered on upper torso and head, suggesting spreading projectiles rather than single bullets. Interrogated captured American soldier about ammunition supply. He claimed unlimited availability, could request replacement shells as easily as requesting food. If true, represents military-industrial capacity beyond our ability to counter through conventional means. We fight with courage and spirit. They fight with machinery and abundance. History will judge which philosophy deserves to prevail, but present circumstances suggest material advantage overwhelms moral superiority." The statistical accumulation of Japanese casualties attributable to shotgun fire created medical documentation that revealed the weapon's lethality through cold numerical assessment. Captured Japanese medical reports from various Pacific campaigns, analyzed collectively by the Army Medical Department's Wound Ballistics Research Division in 1944, indicated that soldiers wounded by shotgun fire died at rates exceeding 73% morts, compared to 41% mortality for conventional rifle wounds. The disparity explained by shotgun projectiles' tendency to inflict multiple simultaneous trauma sites that overwhelmed human physiology's capacity for survival. A single shotgun blast might produce 9 separate wounds, each one individually survivable but collectively catastrophic, creating medical challenges that Japanese field hospitals, already struggling with inadequate supplies and personnel, found essentially impossible to address effectively. The industrial resources supporting American shotgun deployment in the Pacific Theater, when calculated across the entire supply chain from raw materials to frontline employment, represented an economic investment that exceeded the total military budget of several smaller Axis powers. Steel allocation for shotgun barrel production consumed approximately 847 tons annually during peak 1943 manufacturing, while walnut stock production required 23,000 board feet of premium hardwood monthly, materials that American industry provided without reducing production of higher priority weapons systems. The ammunition supply chain consumed even more dramatic resources: 4,100 tons of lead annually for shot production, 2,700 tons of brass for shell casings, 890 tons of gunpowder, 1,240 tons of paper and wax for shell bodies, plus the transportation infrastructure required to move these materials through dozens of manufacturing facilities, and finally to Pacific combat zones 7,000 miles from American industrial centers. Japanese intelligence analysts attempting to comprehend this material avalanche found themselves confronting not merely American industrial capacity, but a fundamentally alien approach to warfare that treated material abundance as a weapon system in itself. Captain Minoru Wada, assigned to the Imperial Japanese Army Intelligence Bureau in Tokyo, prepared a classified assessment in September 1943 that circulated among senior staff officers before disappearing into archives that American occupation forces would later discover. Wada's analysis translated and declassified in 1952, contained passages remarkable for their clinical acknowledgement of Japanese strategic hopelessness. American shotgun deployment represents merely one minor weapon system among hundreds receiving similar industrial support. Yet even this tactical novelty, considered unimportant by their military establishment, receives greater manufacturing capacity and logistics support than our Army allocates to its primary infantry weapon. The Americans produce more shotgun ammunition monthly than we produce rifle cartridges quarterly. This disparity extends across every category of military materiel. We cannot compete with this industrial capacity through superior tactics or fighting spirit. The mathematics are impossible. The cascading statistical evidence of American material superiority manifested in procurement figures that Japanese planners found literally incomprehensible within their economic framework. During calendar year 1943, the United States manufactured and deployed to Pacific Theater forces approximately 139,925 shotguns, 108 million shells, plus replacement parts sufficient to maintain operational readiness rates exceeding 97% despite tropical conditions that destroyed Japanese weapons within months. This production occurred simultaneously with manufacturing 4.1 million M1 Grand rifles, 1.9 million M1 carbines, 698,000 Browning automatic rifles, and 347,000 machine guns of various types, a combined small arms output that exceeded total Japanese weapons production across all categories by a factor of approximately 12 to 1. The shotgun program represented less than 2% of American small arms manufacturing capacity, a peripheral effort that nonetheless dwarfed Japanese ability to supply their forces with any comparable weapon system. The testimony of Japanese soldiers who survived the war provided the most devastating assessments of shotgun psychological impact, accounts that revealed how a single weapon system could undermine military morale more effectively than strategic bombing or naval blockade. Sergeant Takeo Yamaguchi, interviewed by American military historians in 1946, recalled his experiences fighting Marine forces on Peleliu in September 1944. Before combat, officers told us Americans were weak, preferred comfort over hardship, would break under pressure. First time I heard the shotguns, I knew this was propaganda. The sound alone was terrifying, deep, violent, final. You heard a man scream, then nothing. Our medics found bodies with wounds across entire chest and face. One man, maybe 20 wounds from single shot. We realized quickly that bravery meant nothing against these weapons. You could be the most courageous soldier in the Emperor's army, make no difference. The shotgun killed brave men and cowards equally. That understanding destroyed morale worse than any defeat. We were not fighting men but machines, and the machines had unlimited ammunition. The final expansion of shotgun deployment in late 1943 and throughout 1944 demonstrated that American industry could scale production almost arbitrarily when tactical requirements demanded, the manufacturing system responding to field requests with a flexibility that suggested nearly infinite capacity. Marine Corps procurement requests submitted in October 1943 called for increasing shotgun allocation to one weapon per six-man fire team rather than per squad, effectively doubling the number of shotguns in frontline service. American industry fulfilled this request within 4 months, delivering an additional 47,000 weapons to Pacific depots by February 1944 without reducing production of any other weapon system. The manufacturing surge accomplished simply by adding third shifts at existing facilities and authorizing overtime that doubled worker compensation without significantly impacting unit costs through economies of scale that Japanese industry could not replicate under any circumstances. The ammunition stockpiling that accompanied this deployment increase revealed American logistical planning that operated on assumptions Japanese quartermasters would have considered insane. By June 1944, Marine Corps depots in the Pacific Theater maintained a 120-day supply of shotgun ammunition, approximately 52 million shells distributed across forward supply points from Hawaii to New Guinea, creating redundant stockpiles sufficient to sustain maximum combat expenditure rates for 4 months without any resupply from the continental United States. This represented enough ammunition to fire approximately 372,000 shells daily across the entire Pacific Theater, a consumption rate that would have bankrupted the Japanese military budget in less than a week, but barely registered as a line item in American logistics accounting. The shells treated with the same casual abundance Americans accorded to toilet paper, chewing gum, and other consumables that existed in quantities limited only by transportation capacity rather than manufacturing output. The closing thesis emerged not from any single engagement or statistical revelation, but from the accumulated weight of industrial evidence that transformed tactical observations into strategic certainty. The shotgun's battlefield effectiveness mattered less than what it represented. American capacity to manufacture, supply, and maintain a weapon system considered peripheral to their main war effort while still overwhelming Japanese ability to counter it through any combination of tactics, training, or fighting spirit. Japanese soldiers faced enemies who possessed not merely superior weapons, but weapons backed by industrial infrastructure so vast that even its minor outputs exceeded Japanese maximum efforts. The Marines advancing through Pacific jungles with Winchester shotguns represented the visible edge of an industrial juggernaut that had casually allocated more resources to this single specialized weapon than Japan devoted to its entire infantry small arms program. The mathematics were not of tactics but of industrial inevitability. The cold calculation that no amount of courage or sacrifice could overcome when one side possessed functional, unlimited material resources, while the other rationed rifle cartridges like precious heirlooms. The final accounting of shotgun deployment in the Pacific War produced statistics that Japanese military historians would later describe as representing the quantification of hopelessness made manifest through industrial arithmetic. Between December 1941 and August 1945, American forces deployed approximately 237,000 shotguns to Pacific theater operations, expending an estimated 423 million shells in combat and training operations, creating casualty rates in close-quarters engagements that averaged 4.7 Japanese soldiers killed or wounded per American Marine casualty when shotguns constituted primary weapons in the engagement. These figures, compiled from after-action reports, medical records, and prisoner interrogations, painted a picture of tactical dominance so complete that it transcended individual battles or campaigns, becoming instead a theater-wide phenomenon that influenced Japanese operational planning at every level, from squad tactics to divisional strategy. The weapon's legacy extended beyond immediate battlefield results to reshape American military doctrine regarding close-quarters combat, validating the concept that overwhelming firepower applied at point-blank range could substitute for traditional infantry skills like marksmanship and fire discipline. Marine Corps Infantry Training Manual 1944 edition formalized shotgun employment doctrine that would persist through subsequent conflicts, establishing the weapon as a permanent component of American small unit organization rather than a temporary expedient for jungle warfare. The manual's section on shotgun tactics contained language that acknowledged the weapon's transformative impact. The shotgun represents the practical application of industrial firepower superiority to individual infantry combat, allowing a single Marine to achieve suppressive effects previously requiring entire fire teams, while reducing training requirements through simplified aiming techniques suitable for personnel with minimal marksmanship instruction. Private Nakamura, the Japanese soldier whose testimony had appeared earlier in this narrative, provided a closing observation during his final interrogation before repatriation in 1946, words that captured the existential despair of fighting an enemy whose material advantages seemed to violate natural law. "I understand now why we lost the war," Nakamura told his American interviewer, Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison. Speaking through an interpreter who struggled to convey the resignation in the prisoner's voice, was not about courage or tactics or even strategy. You had weapons you considered barely worth discussing, guns you gave to teenagers after few days' training, and you supplied these minor weapons better than we supplied our most elite units. I saw American prisoners eating from cans, throwing half-eaten food away, saw captured supply dumps with ammunition stacked higher than houses, saw Marines firing shotguns at sounds in the jungle. Not even visible targets, just sounds, because they had so much ammunition they could afford to waste it. That was when I knew. Not when we lost a battle, but when I saw that waste. You were so rich you could afford to throw away what we would have treasured. How do you fight that? How do you defeat enemies who treat military supplies like garbage because they have too much of everything? The industrial infrastructure that had produced the shotgun program continued expanding even as the war drew to a close. American manufacturing capacity increasing until the final months of 1945, when surrender rendered additional production unnecessary. Winchester Repeating Arms Company alone had manufactured 847 Model 12 shotguns between 1941 and 1945, averaging 423 weapons daily during peak production. While combined ammunition manufacturers had produced an estimated 1.2 billion 12-gauge shells during the same period, enough ammunition to fire approximately 5,063 shells for every shotgun ever deployed, creating surplus stocks that would supply American military and law enforcement needs for decades after the war's conclusion. The excess production vanished into warehouse storage, some shells eventually destroyed as obsolete, others sold as surplus to civilian markets, the remainder simply forgotten in logistics depots scattered across the American military infrastructure, physical evidence of industrial capacity so vast that its overflow exceeded peacetime requirements. Staff Sergeant Kowalski, whose metallic click had opened this narrative on Bougainville Island in March 1943, survived the war and returned to his family's farm in Wisconsin, carrying his Winchester Model 12 as a war trophy authorized by sympathetic officers who understood what the weapon represented. The shotgun hung above Kowalski's fireplace for 47 years until his death in 1992, a reminder of industrial warfare's fundamental equation, that modern combat had become less about individual skill or collective courage than about which nation could manufacture, transport, and expend material resources at rates that transformed warfare from human contest into industrial process. Kowalski rarely discussed his combat experiences with family members or journalists, but on his deathbed, speaking to his grandson who had asked about the shotgun's significance, the former Marine offered a final assessment that captured the weapon's true meaning. That gun killed a lot of men, but wasn't the gun that won the war. Was everything behind the gun, the factories, the ships, the supplies, the whole American machine. Japanese had brave soldiers, probably braver than us. But we had factories that never stopped, ships that kept coming, ammunition that never ran out. Wasn't a fair fight. Never was. The metallic click of the pump-action shotgun, that sound which had echoed through Pacific jungles from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, represented not merely a weapon being loaded, but the sound of industrial modernity overwhelming martial tradition, of assembly lines defeating warrior culture, of American manufacturing capacity reducing human courage to an insufficient variable in the mathematics of total war. It was the sound of empires collapsing not under military defeat, but under the realization that they had entered a conflict where victory required not better soldiers, but better factories, and that the United States possessed both in quantities that rendered Japanese resistance not merely futile, but mathematically impossible from the moment the first shells left their Connecticut manufacturing facilities destined for Pacific battlefields, where young men would die in numbers determined not by tactical skill, but by industrial production schedules calculated in spreadsheets 7,000 miles from the sound of gunfire. March 15th, 2:47 a.m., Bougainville Island. The click echoed once more through memory, through history, through the final accounting of industrial warfare's brutal arithmetic. The sound that ended empires, the mathematics of 12-gauge inevitability,